Hi everyone, welcome again to this week's motion breakdown. Now we're going to do the round 3, but this time upside. So if you haven't watched the government side, I would advise you to do it, because we will be taking parts of analysis from that side in order to basically explain the strategic value of certain cases and certain bits of pieces of analysis that we have. So it'll be first good for you to watch the first video and then come back to this one. So, like last time, we are doing this house is Ukraine would seek an immediate permanent ceasefire with Russia. And this time we're doing the opposition side. So, just like before, we're going to firstly examine how we should look at this motion or these types of motions. So, basically, it's the same thing as last time. We're just changing the words benefits instead of harms. So there are a couple of ways to look at this. Harms to Ukraine if Russia doesn't agree, but we ask for this. Harms to Ukraine if Russia agrees, which is, higher burden, and what moral obligations the actor has. So this is, in general, a scenario-based motion. So we have to look at multiple scenarios. We could provide structural analysis as to what is the likely scenario, obviously. But given that debating is about probabilities and different scenarios, it's good to have insurance when you're looking at certain cases or not. So, given that's the case, let's generate some statements. There are broadly 3 lines of argumentation that you could provide. Russia will agree to the ceasefire and then break it and create a bunch of problems for Ukraine. Russia will agree to the ceasefire and you'll lose the territories. And Russia will disagree, and this will optically be bad for Ukraine. Importantly, before we examine each and every one of these arguments, we have to preempt in prep that the most likely framing that will come from government side, from any government, whether it's opening government or closing government, is the framing that currently the counteroffensive is not working. So before we even get into making arguments and things like that, we need to firstly examine this framing and see how it interacts with each of these statements. So the framing, and this is the framing that we used in the previous clip, so this is why I explained that it's important for you to firstly watch that video and then get back here. But it's basically the counteroffensive is not working due to these reasons, etc., etc. So we then have to go back and examine each of these statements. So let me just see if this is the next line. Yeah, so how basically does this framing interact with the arguments? So if we run the first argument, which is that Russia will scam us, then the framing isn't necessarily bad for our case. It doesn't necessarily damage us to that extent, because we could say, okay, sure, the counteroffensive isn't working, but we're looking at what this action create more net harms by us doing it. So this is something that will make more sense once we get into the argument. But for now, the thing that you should remember is that the framing doesn't necessarily harm this argument. However, in case we run that these territories, we have to get back these territories, or how this could optically harm us, both of these arguments are in fact contingent on us responding and defeating this framing, because this framing can limit the persuasiveness of the counterfactual of these arguments. Because again, debating is a comparative sport. We're not just looking into why it's bad to, for example, say no to those territories and Russia taking them over. We also have the second burden aspect, which is why in the alternative world, where there is no ceasefire, but we're continuing to push for this for this war and trying to get these territories back, will we actually have a chance of getting them? Or if we're running the optics claim, why? So we could say, oh, it's bad optically if we send this message and Russia says no, we look weak or something like that. Again, the burden it's a comparative debate. The burden is why on the flip side will you actually be able to have a good image, whatever that would mean when we're developing this argument. And if you actually can't take back these territories, if you're fighting a losing war, then your image is depleted anyway. So this is strategic observations that we should make to each of these arguments before we even get into creating these arguments. So given that's the case, then the best and easiest path to victory is actually choosing option 1. because it's the least susceptible to the framing that is given from government side. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So again, like similar actor motions, we're analyzing what does the actor care about. By the way, a side note here, it just so happens that I'm analyzing a lot of the actor motions recently, that for future videos it won't be the case, but basically, if you are wondering how this applies to non-actor or motions, you just need to ask yourself, why does this argument win the debate? Or why is this a significant issue that we have to win? Or why is this like strategic for a round or something like that? It just so happens that these questions are within actor motions are correlated with what does the actor care about. But in general, you could also make them for normal arguments, and in future videos, I hope to explain that a bit more. So what does the actor care about? The actor cares about keeping the current territories that they currently have and deterring Russia from taking negative actions towards you. Why is this true? There are two broad reasons. The first is that the war is super uncertain. It could play out in many different ways. Maybe Ukraine will take back all the territories. Maybe Russia will take back all the territories. Maybe there will be some kind of split. Like, there's so many ways that this war could end. But the only thing that we know is for sure is that right now Ukraine has the territories of the majority of the country, and thus keeping those territories is important to the country. And again, similar logic to the government video, most people live in these territories, thus we should prioritize the needs of the many in this particular case. Cool, so this is why the actor cares about these things. Let's then run the argument. The argument is basically Russia will scam you. So why is this true? Basically, you could point to a lot of empirical evidence to why this is the case. This is an extremely untrustworthy partner, if you could even call it a partner. There are many examples where they acted in bad faith, whether it's taking Crimea, whether it's losing commitments to their own problems, like the partners, like, for example, Armenia literally being invaded by Azerbaijan, like, for example, the Central Asia republics literally facing border skirmishes and things like that, that in the past, Russia would deter these countries from doing this type of thing, or Russia would be a security partner. Now, when these countries face this thing, Russia is nowhere to be found. There are multiple other examples where they have also agreed to something, but then they have went on the backs of their partners. So yeah, more incentive-wise, so not just example-wise, the incentive is the longer the war protracts, although protracts may be a wrong word, but the more time basically Russia has, the more this is in their favor. The more time they could, for example, build up fortifications. They could send supplies to their soldiers. They can conscript a new batch of troops. They could fortify internally and all these type of things. So actually having this like small buffer of a ceasefire, which is permanent in brackets, actually could allow them to do all of these type of things. Now, all of these things require time, and it's hard to do all these things in a focused manner if on the day-to-day you're wondering, okay, what's happening on this front line or that front line? What's happening in controlling the populations? What's happening in this and that? It's much more easier for you to do this when there's a permanent ceasefire where you can build up like the forces and do these things. This is like if you think about it like in an analogical situation, this is the same argument that Israel is doing against why they're not doing the ceasefire with Hamas, because their argument is if we don't do a ceasefire, then basically they could round up their weapons and they could tomorrow attack us more. So it's just, I'm not saying this like because if this is particularly true. I'm just saying this as an illustration for what could happen or might happen in these situations. So the question then becomes, why is this asymmetrical? So why does this change? Not why does this change, but why Russia can do this and why Ukraine can't do this? Because presumably the government response could be something along the lines of, well, if this happens, then we're just back at status quo, but at least we tried, right? This could be the most likely government response to this argument. Well, that's not necessarily the case, and there are two reasons for this. The first is that given government side's very own analysis, that the West currently has a tendency to pressure Ukraine to basically stop the war or to not fight this war continuously, whether it's the Democrats or Republicans or whether it's certain Western European countries. If this were to happen and if they were to create this permanent ceasefire, the West would pressure Ukraine to play ball of sorts. So this would mean, for example, that they would tell them, pull back your troops from the border, with Russia. They would say, for example, we don't need to send you this military gear or this military funding if there is currently no active war happening right now. And if you look at this, is the government analysis, which is that their own populations want this. So if they were, for example, to say, we did a ceasefire, guys, but we're also sending another 90 billion package to Ukraine in terms of military gear, well, this would be hypocritical and would basically harm their political points. So necessarily, the West will lower its support for Ukraine once the ceasefire happens, and the West would actively push them to take back their troops to keep and continue the ceasefire. Now, this is different from Russia, because firstly, Russia firstly has the intention within this theoretical scenario to scam you. So they actually have the incentive to covertly put soldiers there, covertly send resources there, covertly do these type of things. But also their security partners don't really care. Why do they don't care? Because they have the same incentive system as Russia. All of these security partners are dictatorships that act in bad faith, like it's China, Iran, and these types of countries. But also, secondly, Russia itself is a military country, right? Like they're always producing new weapons. They're always investing in this type of things. They're selling these weapons to other parts of the world. So they, in any scenario, they will try to remilitarize more. And they could use this as an excuse. It's just our military-industrial complex, guys. Like, don't worry. So in this basically interim tug of war, what will happen is Russia will be able to scale up. Ukraine will be forced to scale down. This is the bottom line of this first reason. But secondly, when the Russian counteroffensive happens in this theoretical scenario, they can take over crucial parts within the war effort. So this is like bridges, roads, power plants, basically critical infrastructure, because the way that this will most likely play out is that Russia will snap all of a sudden attack them, and because there's a time lag where Ukraine has scaled down, Russia will be able to take these critical places, similar to how they did in the beginning parts of the war. Now, does that mean that they'll take like a significant chunk of land? Probably not, but they will take some chunks of land that will allow them to have more positioning to either A, defend their own territories, or B, continue pushing and pressing forward and doing all of these things. And this is a particularly bad scenario for Ukraine. Now, as you can imagine, this is this analysis is kind of not the standard, here are 5 structural reasons for why something is the case. This is much more illustration and much more storytelling of what is most likely to happen. Which obviously in arguments like this, it's much more important to do and to explain process-wise rather than just trying to prove a burden. So this is just like a side note to this argument. What are the impacts? Even if now the West is now more willing to support you, so they go okay, so we tried to reason with these people and tomorrow they attack us. We're going to send even more money. We're going to send even more resources and stuff like that. The problem is that Ukraine have less capacity to take back these territories, because Russia can fortify them and they've taken new parts of Ukraine. So this means a couple of things. The first is that you lose out more than you gain in this war, because even if the West tomorrow, even if let's say Donald Trump is in power and Donald Trump goes yeah, we tried that, now we need to give them more money, we definitely need to do that. It doesn't matter, because money doesn't necessarily equal military success. And if they're able to keep these critical positions, if you lose out more, then you basically flip the government's claim in this debate, because control of the critical areas is much more important than the amount of money that they will give you. Secondly, the Russian counterattack means that there's this time lag of the defenses, which means simply people die. Like your civilians will get hurt based upon this, because you've de-escalated your weapons, and this is bad because you care about your civilians' well-being. But finally, in the long run, this will lead to the bad press for the West. So the way this weighing could work is, for sure, you can concede in the beginning of this Russian counteroffensive, 100% Western politicians will be like, yes, we need to stand with Ukraine, we'll give the weapons and things like that. But realistically, as time passes, as another year or two of the war go on, and Russia has taken back more territory rather than Ukraine taking it, it means that the political will and the political pressure for the continuation of this war is lowered, which means that on net it will drop more, which means that you will be put in a worse position to negotiate with Russia down the line, which this is bad because either A, you will be forced to negotiate with them, and again they will attack you, and again you'll be back in this situation, or B, you'll negotiate, you'll reach a peace agreement, which is bad for you. So basically, because of this, it's much more better to err on the side of caution, so to speak, and continue the war effort right now, rather than reaching this particularly bad scenario that could be extremely damaging for you. And that's how you went from up with that argument. Cool. Let's look at another argument, which is the you will take back the territories argument. So what does the actor care about? Getting back those oblasts. There are a couple of reasons for why this is the case. Firstly, for a fact, we know that your population is there and they live under Russian oppression. For a fact, we know that war crimes are happening there. There are examples like Bucha. There are examples of deporting children to Ukrainian children to Russian territories. All of these are war crimes. So as time progresses, your population lives under a brutal dictatorship that takes their liberties and their livelihood. Secondly, is that you have economical impacts. These territories are important, firstly, for marine trade, because they're like many of them are like around the Black Sea seaside that you need as a hub to transport your grain. There are potential resources there in the future, and also you have a population. So if tomorrow you lose out, I don't know how many people live there, but let's say 10 million, and you're a 90 million populated country, you lose out GDP, you lose out like a huge amount of your scale. So they're like long-term economical impacts. But finally, just for future wars, you're not in NATO, you're not in a security alliance or something like that, which means that a potential second or third war can happen happen against you. So these territories that Russia takes right now, they could use it as a spring for another offensive against you if they decide to invade in another year or something like that. So this is why you care about getting back those territories. So then the question becomes, why will you be able to retake these territories? And here, it's the first thing you need to do is not think so much about analysis, right? It's actually firstly dispelling this bias that most likely judges have in their brain, because judges follow the news and things like that. That currently the war is set in stone and Russia is keeping those territories. And the way you need to do it is do what we call a reality check, which is just simply saying, look, conflicts are very long term and they usually change in bursts. There are many examples of this. The Germans seem to have been winning World War II in the beginning. In the Napoleon Wars, Napoleon was crushing all of the European powers. If you want another more recent example, in the Yugoslav War, the Serbs were also winning in the beginning. And if you want another example, the Russians also seem to were really going to retake this country in 3 days, but it's like it didn't happen that way. The point is, wars are dynamic, and there are multiple examples of how in history they were like very, very close, not very, like it seemed like one side is winning and another was not, and then there were U-turns within the war. So the fact that there is a stalemate right now doesn't mean that in the future this stalemate won't be broken, or it's not that set in stone. So this has more of a reality check vibe towards the judge to believe in the persuasiveness of your analysis before you even give it to them. Cool. So what are the reasons? Firstly, morale of soldiers. Most Russian soldiers don't want to die. Even if the average Russian is kind of a nationalist on this issue and kind of believe, oh yeah, we need to do this, which unfortunately statistics show is the case, that doesn't mean that necessarily people want to die in this war. That doesn't mean that, for example, young kids that are in their 20s want to go and fight and die in this type of things. So like many people that are conscripted either like won't want to fight that much, or may prefer to run away, or may prefer to do these type of things because this is an invasion. In comparison to the Ukrainians, whose morale is much, much higher, since this is viewed as a defense to them, that they're fighting for their country, for their territories, that this is about a national duty and a national pride for them in these type of things, which means that their morale or their willingness to die is much higher than the ones of Russians. Practically, this has implications on the battlefield where one side is defending and the other is attacking. This may, for example, mean that they'll leave their posts. This may, for example, mean that they'll prefer to surrender and stuff like that. Secondly is military technology. The West has a vested interest to try out new weapons in this conflict. This is how they do it. America can't just randomly go and invade a country, although they've done this in the past. But like, let's say it's harder for them to do it now, and they just simply want to have a territory to test out these things. Think about it this way: the javelins that they're currently using were something that at least I don't have any information about this. Maybe I could be wrong, but they haven't used in another conflict. But the general argument here is you want to test out planes, tanks, rocket launchers, all of these type of things. So you have a vested interest to give them in the battlefield to simulate how they would look like against a Russian opponent for future conflicts that may happen, just so that you have this information and have this knowledge. But also, the military-industrial complex, these are companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, etc., who are like extremely rich, actively lobby the government for military projects and actively lobby the government for military spending and things like that. They have an active incentive to keep this war going on because they profiteer directly from this. Like if you've seen the stock of Lockheed Martin, how much it shot through the roof after this war has started, you'll know what I'm talking about. Which means that they have the incentive to buy out both political parties. And probably this is why the Democrats and Republicans are all the same in terms of foreign policy, which means that they have an incentive to provide them with weapons, test those out, and see how it's going. Finally, the Russian military is horrible. It's filled with corruption. There are constant power struggles. It's a super ineffective body, which means that things like, for example, information asymmetry, communication on the front line, and things like that are generally less likely in comparison to the army of Ukraine. Now, probably there are still some problems with the Ukrainian army as well, to be completely nuanced, but they're not to the extent of the scandalous things that are happening in the Russian army. All of this means that the probability of you retaking those territories is like not zero. It exists for sure. And as the war protracts, you may have more and more likelihood of taking a bat. The impacts of this is, even if you don't take all of these territories back, you at least achieve some kind of control of these territories, some kind of positive impact for you. Maybe you take a port city. Maybe you take a crucial supply chain. Maybe you take back, I don't know, one oblast, but you lose out the other ones. But there is still a net positive impact for you, rather than just surrendering and giving out those territories to them right away. Again, this is the more harder clash because you have a higher burden to prove that you'll retake these things. But if the theoretical scenario is you are closing opposition, and opening opposition doesn't necessarily at all engage in this clash, they choose the low-hanging fruit first argument that Russia will simply screw you over. This is something that you have enough time to develop more, to think of more constructive reasons, to nuance them and make them better. Cool. I hope this was helpful and it makes people understand our emotions a bit more. And yeah, see you in the next video. We're doing KCL.